You're listening to the Footballogists with Kevin Gillikin and the Skipper Dude, covering the basics of sports betting.
You got an extra 2.5 points, so you won the bet 30.5 to 30. That's how point spreads work.
In-depth analysis of every NFL spread.
So Vegas is giving Baltimore with the win and 4 points to do so. Now, I think that's a crazy bet. Baltimore is a really good team. Miami is a terrible team. 4 points is not nearly enough. Baltimore should win by at least 1 touchdown. Easy. Bank it. Bet it.
Plus yearly and daily fantasy football.
Will he be the top fantasy quarterback for a year? No, but Jimmy Garoppolo is going to have a fantastic week 1. He's got all the people around him, and he's playing against a terrible Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense.
All with a focus on the human element.
We're talking about another Belichick disciple in his first year after almost zero experience as a coordinator in the NFL, and he has to somehow manage this quarterback situation with Josh Rosen and Ryan Fitzpatrick. Add that to Rosen's bad attitude and anything else going on in the Miami locker room, and it's just aiming for disaster for the season, for fantasy, for everything for the Miami Dolphins in 2019.
Please gamble responsibly.
I'm Kevin Gillikin, the host of the Footballogists. Today we talk about all things NFC North. The Packers and Bears are about to phase off, but we will talk about all 4 teams in that division. 4 teams that, according to Bleacher Report, have 4 of the top 12 defenses in all of football. That's not it. They also have some good quarterbacks and one of the best in all of football. We will also send it to the Skipper Dude. He'll do a segment on the basics of sports betting. If you've already listened to this show, you've already heard this segment, and you can skip ahead to the 9-minute 30 mark. Otherwise, absolutely give it a listen. He will tell you everything you need to know about the basics of how to bet on the NFL. Otherwise, stay tuned. We will talk about the over-unders of the win totals for the teams in the NFC North. There are going to be a few surprises. But first, Skipper Dude.
Thanks, Kevin, for having me on and asking me to do a little overview of how NFL gambling works. I think this should be fun. So first of all, if you've ever been to a casino and you know how a casino works, you know that casinos don't actually make their money gambling. Casinos make their money facilitating gambling for others like you or me. If you play blackjack or craps or roulette, the casino is taking the other side of bets that you're laying down, but they've openly rigged the odds to where they will always win over time. Maybe not on 1 or 2 or even 10 particular gamblers, but with hundreds of thousands or millions of gamblers making what probably amount to hundreds of millions of bets, they will always win. The odds of every roll or every hand is very slightly in their favor, and that's what they count on over time to make money. Now, live poker, and I'm not talking about poker machines, but actually live poker, is a little different. Casinos are not involved in betting at all with poker. They're simply dealing the cards and taking a small cut of every hand or of the action. Some poker players will win big, others will lose big, but casinos will always take a very small cut on every game, and those wins, those cuts over time are what help make them rich. Now, sports gambling from a casino perspective is kind of a hybrid between blackjack and poker. So technically, when you make a bet, you are betting against the sports book. But the job of the sports book is to see to it that an equal number of dollars, not bettors, but dollars, are being bet on both teams. That's where they make their money. Now I'll explain. So let's say there's a game, hypothetically, in 2019, actually, this will come up, with Miami at New England. Okay, on paper, this is going to be a total blowout. Now, if casinos were to just take a bet on who will win this game, 98 or maybe even $99.50 out of every 100 are going to be bet on the Patriots. And when, as is likely, the Patriots win, it would leave a disaster for the casino. So they can't take that bet. Remember, casinos make their money little bits at a time when equal number of dollars are bet on both teams. And here's how they do it. So they have 2 different ways of evening things out and making the betting on both teams roughly equal. The first is called the point spread. Now let me switch over to a real life week 1 2019 game, and that's the Broncos at Oakland to play the Raiders. The Raiders are the favorite in the game, so to make the betting equal, casinos basically gift the Broncos 2.5 points, which is what they've done. So let's say the Raiders win that game 30-28. The Raiders won the game, but from a betting perspective, if you took the Broncos, you got an extra 2.5 points, so you won the bet 30.5-30. That's how point spreads work. Now, when you made your bet and you took the Broncos and the 2.5 points, you probably saw a line of -110. What that means is that you needed $110 to win 100. That's the -110. Now, to make the numbers here a little easier, we'll just say $11 to win 10. The guy who took the Raiders and gave up 2.5 points, he also had a line of -110, and he also bet $11 to win 10. So combined, the two of you bet $22, 11 plus 11. You won the bet, so you won 21. You won your original $11 plus the 10 that you won, the 11 to win 10. The Raider better got nothing. So the two of you combined bet $22. You got 21 back. Where did the extra dollar go? The casino kept it as a service fee. That's how they make their money. Now, the other standard way to bet on football games is what's called the line. It's fairly similar to the -110 I just discussed above, except that with the line, there is no point spread, and to win your bet, you only need your team to win the game. Now, it gets a little bit more complicated, the numbers do, but let's go back to the Broncos at the Raiders. The Broncos are a +125 to win that game, and the Raiders are a -135. What that means is that if you want to bet on the Broncos, a $100 bet on the Broncos will win 125, and a $135 bet on the Raiders will win 100. Okay, that's how lines work, and basically the same type of thing on that spread between 125 and 135. That's where Vegas makes its money. All right, so now beyond the basics, casinos also try to spice things up with bets like parlays, where you pick anywhere from 2 to about 10 or even more games, and you win money based on the number of games that you win. You actually have to win all of the games, and if you win them all, that's why it's called a parlay. You win multiple times your money. So let's say you picked 2 games and won them both. You'll win 2 times 2, or about 4 times your money, less the casino take. If you picked 5 games and won, you'll win 2 to the 5th power. You'll win 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, or 32 times your money. In real life, it's usually closer to about 30 times your money because, the casino is going to get its take. But you get the idea. So finally, I want to make a quick admonishment if you're considering betting on NFL games. I spent 2 NFL seasons in Las Vegas trying to win money betting football in addition to my regular job, and it is a whole lot tougher than you think. On paper, you actually only need to win 52.5% of the time. That's a calculation I did a while back in order to make money, but it's so much tougher to do that, it's hard to even imagine. In fact, the better I got at analyzing games during those 2 seasons, the worse I actually did betting. And I kind of learned how extremely far away I was from being able to forecast games well enough to make money consistently. For me, I got to kind of where I was like a scratch golfer betting wise. Pretty decent, but I was nowhere near being a PGA pro and nowhere good enough to make money consistently, because it's only those PGA pros of bettors who are going to actually make money consistently. So, as entertainment, sports gambling can be a ton of fun. I love it. It can help amplify the fan experience on game day and just make for a lot more adrenaline in watching the NFL. But as an addiction or as a money-making career, just don't go there. Just don't. Have fun with it and keep things in moderation. Kevin, back to you.
So as it says a little bit in the intro, this show is all about the human element. We focus on things that affect these players as men, these coaches as men, the entire team as human beings, not just these statistics that everyone sees on a spreadsheet. Now, of course, we will look at some of the numbers. We'll look at the offensive lines, how they're ranked, and how the quarterbacks, stats stack up compared to each other, but we don't only focus on the numbers. We also look into injuries. We look at the new coaching staffs and new schemes. How long will that take the teams to figure out new schemes? Will Aaron Rodgers be able to work with Matt LaFleur immediately, especially having not played at all in the preseason? So there are a lot of those things that we'd like to focus on, and that's how we're going to bet. So we bet the over-under of the total wins as predicted by Tipico. So Tipico is the site that I look at. There are many, many sites. You can also go, of course, to Vegas and go into a sports book. There are, I believe, 11 states in the U.S. right now that have legalized sports gambling. As Skipper Dude said, please gamble responsibly. Don't waste money you cannot afford to lose, because typically you lose. Even if you win 52% of the bets, that's really, really good. So just remember, this is a really hard job to get right. We're going to start today with the Detroit Lions. The Lions are, I think, a really interesting team. And really, this whole division is extremely interesting and extremely tough to bet. I had a really hard time preparing the show because there's so much balance in this division. I think this is the toughest division in all of football. There's not a weak team. The defenses are stellar, and really the quarterbacks are all very solid. I mean, there's one I really don't like, and that one I don't like will be the team that I think will do worse than everyone expects, but we'll get to that as we go along. The Detroit Lions in 2018 were 6-10. Tipico has them at 6.5 wins, which means if you bet the under, you have them winning 6 or fewer games. If you bet the over, you have them winning 7 or more games. So my job on this show is to either buy them, which means they win 7 or more, or to sell them, which means they win 6 or less, or occasionally I will push because I think the bet is too unpredictable. The team is probably going to win around 6 or 7 games. And if they're going to win 6 or 7, there's no real use in betting them, because then it's just you're just guessing. Now, of course, all bets are guesses. I understand that. It's trying to predict the future. But if it's a push, if you really think, I'm really not sure, then just stay away from it. And there will be several of those, unfortunately, on this show because this is such a tough division. So, of course, the Detroit Lions have had Matthew Stafford there, it seems like, forever. He's a veteran quarterback, and he's had a couple really big years. He's also had a couple years where he's been banged up. He's had bad offensive lines, and he's had bad teams for about half of his time in Detroit. He's really a quarterback that is, he is, I think he's respected around the league, but people don't really know what to think of him because he hasn't really won anything, partly because of his team around him. But, he's always given the benefit of the doubt. Ever since he came into the league, it's always like, okay, he's a great quarterback. He can really sling it. And then he doesn't win. And eventually you have to start pointing the finger at him and saying, hey, maybe he's not that great of a quarterback. In 2018, he was 22nd in QBR. That's not good. That's well below average. He had a QBR of 51.3. And if you put that up with one of the top guys, I'll give you a hint. One of the top quarterbacks, according to QBR, was a 71.0 QBR in 2018, and that's one of the quarterbacks in the division. It's just not who you think. Anyway, Stafford, it was not him. He was 22nd in QBR. He was 25th in pass yards per game with 231. He had 21 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. What you saw last year was a team that really started to go away from trying to pass the ball to win. I think Matt Patricia, the new head coach, the first-time head coach last season, really decided that this is going to be kind of a ground and pound type of a team, a team that's going to be nasty up in the trenches. They're going to run the ball much more, and they're not going to pass it 50 or 60 times a game. And it's probably an advantage to Stafford. So I think that these numbers are actually skewed a bit because their entire strategy changed. And so I think that actually it's almost a good thing to see his passing yards down. It means that he's not the guy you have to rely on to win games. It also means that, maybe the defense isn't just absolutely horrendous, which this year they're actually supposed to be pretty good. Now, Stafford has some really good guys to pass to, I think. I mean, I actually really like his wide receiver core. Kenny Golladay really took a step forward last year. He's their number one guy. Can he be a good number one? I think so. He proved last year he can be at least a solid one. Marvin Jones Jr. can blow the top off the defenses. He's done it over and over. He's criminally underdrafted in fantasy football this season. Damian Amendola has been around, obviously. He's played for the Patriots and the Dolphins, and I think who did he play for last year? The Rams, maybe. He's a dependable slot guy, a guy who's going to get open. He's going to be a nice comfort blanket for him, for Stafford, that is. And I really like their first-round pick, TJ Hawkinson. This is a guy that I watched a bit in the preseason. I will look back on his tape, and he looks like he could really be a playmaker and a very good blocker. So he's a guy who really brings a rounded game to that position that they've desperately needed. And they've tried to bring in, it seems, year after year, they brought in Eric Ebron, and for some reason it just didn't work. And then he went and had success in Indy. But they hope that Hawkinson can be the next, the guy who helps change their offense and who helps not only the passing game, but the running game. And I think it's possible. I think this guy, he's a top 10 pick. He really could be something special. He's one of the highest picked tight ends, I believe, ever. I didn't actually look that up. I should have. But if I remember right, he's one of the highest picked ever. You rarely see tight ends go in the first round, and when they do, they rarely succeed. And tight ends in their first year often also don't have success. But I think he's a guy who is going to immediately contribute because of his blocking skills and because of his route running ability. And I don't see a whole lot of weaknesses in his game. And you see why, again, he went very, very early in the first round of the 2019 draft. So I actually really like their offense. Pro Football Focus ranks their offensive line as 16th in the NFL. So, yeah, just below average. So when it's around, I always look when it's from 10 to, or maybe let's say 12 to 15, or 12 to 17, let's say. You're looking at a team that you kind of hope will see some success, or an offensive line that will be decent, but it could go in the top 12, it could go in the bottom 17. So it's going to be okay. According to Bleacher Report, as I said in the opening, they have the 12th best defense. They, in 2018, were the 16th ranked in points per game against, and they came in this year, or in the offseason, they added Trey Flowers from New England, who's a really good defensive lineman, Damon Harrison Jr., who's from the Giants, a really big beast up there, also on the defensive line. So they really stuffed up that defensive line. They got a solid secondary and really a solid defense. There aren't a lot of guys that are really that really stick out, besides, I'd say, Harrison Jr. and Flowers. But if they can get enough pressure, I think this secondary, which is good, not great, will take advantage. And I think you see why they're in the top half of defenses, according to Bleacher Report, this season. So you're looking at I believe, above average defense, or an above average offense with Stafford, Golladay, Jones, Amendola. And I didn't even mention, they have Kerryon Johnson, who showed he can be a really solid running back. And we'll get a lot of action in 2019. He's kind of the bell cow guy. He really showed up. He's a guy, unfortunately, I traded early in the year in fantasy, and it came back to bite me in the butt. A guy who really could carry the load for this team and help Stafford and his offense play, with more short downs on third down. So Stafford will be more of a guy who just needs to complete third downs and be good in situational football, which I believe he can be. I think he has the talent to do so. Now their coaching staff they're all coming really into their second season, except Darrell Bevel, who will be the first year as offensive coordinator. Matt Patricia is in his second season as head coach. Of course, he comes over from a long stint as the defensive coordinator in New England, and he'll be helped by Paul Pasqualoni to call plays. Pasqualoni is also in his second year with Patricia. Pasqualoni's been in the NFL for 47 years. 47, that's a long time to be in the National Football League. So he's been around. I think they're going to have a hard-nosed defense. They're going to play like their coach, who I think is kind of a hard-nosed dude, no-nonsense type guy. I think Darrell Bevel is going to bring also that hard-nosed offense. He was a long-time offensive coordinator in Seattle in their heyday, when they were dominating teams with their offense and defense, really with Marshawn Lynch and Russell Wilson. Performing when he needed to, and really trying to dominate teams with a ground and pound attack, and of course a very, very good quarterback. So hopefully for Detroit, they can find a way to amp up that offense. Give Stafford a chance to make the plays that we all know that he is capable of making. Now they have the 19th hardest schedule, which means the 13th easiest. They're kind of right in the middle. It's not a brutal schedule, but it's not an easy one either. There are a lot of games I see on here that I don't have them winning. So when you start looking at this team, at their schedule, and at the typical 6.5 bet, I have a hard time betting this game or this team. You look at their schedule. They start at Arizona. That should be a win. I think Arizona is going to be a mess to start, though they could surprise people because their offense is going to be so unusual. Arizona could be a team that gives people troubles the first few weeks, and then teams, defensive coordinators figure out, okay, yeah, this is literally a college scheme. So it could be a bit of a tough game in Arizona, but I still think Detroit's a better team. They have more talent and a better coach. So I actually think that Detroit will win that. Then it's at home against the Chargers, at Philadelphia, at home against Kansas City. Those are three really hard games, and I don't think they win those. I think two of them are at home, which is a benefit against the Chargers and Kansas City, but I think those are two teams that are better than Detroit. Then they have a bye. I don't like early byes. I've said that before in previous shows. I think it sets you up for a rough middle half of the season. But they do then go at Green Bay and at home against Minnesota. Again, really tough. And you're coming out of the break and you're at Green Bay. That's an evening game. And then you have at home against Minnesota the next week. And that's a short week. So the game against Green Bay is on a Monday night, and then you have a short week going at home against Minnesota. So, you're not traveling much if you're Detroit, but you're facing two really good teams, and on a short week, I think they lose both of those games. So not a good start for Detroit. I've actually got them at 1-5 to start the season. Though it then gets a little easier after that. They got the Giants at home. That should be a win. At Oakland, I think should be a win. At Chicago, I think Chicago is still going to be a tough team. Obviously, we'll talk about them in a bit. Dallas, Washington, again, at home against Chicago, at Minnesota, Tampa Bay, Denver, Green Bay. So when you come down to it, their second half of the season actually lightens up a bit. You got the Giants and Washington, Tampa Bay, and Denver, all teams that are not going to be great this year, all teams that really could fade in the second half. I like Tampa Bay's offense, but they're not quite there yet. Denver, obviously, they're my team. They're a team I want to win. It's at Denver in December. That could be really difficult, but I think that's kind of a push. So this is a really hard team to bet. And that's kind of my point when it comes to the Detroit Lions, because I think they're going to have a decent year. I think they're going to battle. I think they're going to be a tough team to beat. And they're a team that's really hard to predict their wins and losses. I think they could be a 5-win team, and I think they could be a 10-win team. Now, 10 wins I think is really high. So honestly, no, excuse that. Wipe that out. I'll say they could be an 8 or 9 win team. I think that's more likely. So let's say they could be 5 or they could win 8. And so this is one of those teams that I just have to give it a push. I mean, the 6.5, that's about right to me. I mean, 6 wins, 7 wins, that sounds about what Detroit is going to do. They've got a pretty tough schedule. I don't like the early bye. I don't love their offense. I don't love their defense. But they're going to be tough. They're going to be a tough out. And you'll see as the show goes along, that is going to come up over and over again, that this is going to be a tough division to bet. So when it comes to the Detroit Lions, the 6.5 points as given, or 6.5 total wins as given by Tipico, just stay away from it. It's not worth it. Not a very good bet. There are plenty of other bets out there, like the Miami. I think they had them at 6.5 wins. Buffalo, I think, was also at 7.5. Those are two really good bets. There are several others. I think Baltimore's going to do better. So go check out my other shows if you're desperate to bet something, but don't bet the Detroit Lions. Okay. Having said all of that, up next we have the Minnesota Vikings. They were 8-7 in 2018. Tipico has them at 9.5 wins in 2019. I will tell you just why this is one of the teams I really like and one of the bets I really don't. Minnesota Vikings after this. Okay, that was the Detroit Lions. Now we've got the Minnesota Vikings. They are another very interesting team. They've got a lot going for them, but they were, last season they were just so meh. That's just how they've been lately, it seems. They're a team that they kind of pull out miracles every now and then, like they did 2 years ago against New Orleans, but they can't quite take that step. They can't quite, under Mike Zimmer, they win a lot of games, they go to the playoffs, but that's about it. They won 8 games last season. They must have tied one. I've got them at 8-7, which is impossible. So it must have been 8-7-1. That must have been the game that they tied. They must have tied against the Green Bay Packers. Somehow that doesn't register in my memory. But anyway, 8-7-1 it must have been. And this year, Tipico has them at 9.5 wins. Another tough one. If anyone listens to my show on milehighreport.com, which I absolutely recommend you do, I imagine anyone listening to this show probably came over from that show. But if you haven't, you know that I did my predictions and I had Minnesota as a wild card going into the playoffs, which means I obviously like them to win at least 9 games because 8-8 and make the playoffs almost never happens. So, in short, who are the Minnesota Vikings? Okay, as we said at the start, they're one of the teams with a top 12 defense according to Bleacher Report, and Bleacher Report has them as the 3rd best defense heading into 2019. They were 9th in points allowed in 2018. They had 50 sacks last season, which was 3rd best in the NFL. They're extremely deep in the secondary with Xavier Rhodes, who can be even one of the top 3 cornerbacks. They've got a decent front line. They've got solid linebackers, and they just do things well. They're well coached, they're well-rounded, and they're really deep. And as we see in the NFL, depth really matters, especially, obviously, when you have injuries. You've got to have someone with talent to come back up. It's something I see with my Denver Broncos, that they just don't have that depth, and it worries the heck out of me. Minnesota's got that depth, at least in several positions on their defense, and that's part of why I think that Bleacher Report has them ranked 3rd overall. So with a 3rd overall defense, obviously, you're looking at a team that is immediately going to compete in every single game. When you have a top 5 defense, you've got a chance to make the playoffs. Now, the next parts, which I believe are the most important, are offensive line and quarterback and coaching. So the offensive line, according to Pro Football Focus, is the 25th. So not so good. They've added a couple guys in the last few years, but they haven't really improved, and they're part of the reason why they didn't, do a whole lot last season. They really have to improve that, obviously. They have to take care of Kirk Cousins and give him a chance to be the quarterback that they are paying. I believe he's one of the top 3 paid quarterbacks in the NFL, which is nuts considering, he was 14th in QBR at 59.5 QBR rating. He was 16th in pass yards per game, 266. He had 30 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, but the eye test was not good. Cousins was not good enough for his paycheck, and when that's the case, you got to start wondering why. What's the problem with him? Why is he not the guy people think he should be? And he's a guy who never wins big games. He just doesn't. He doesn't seem to have a clutch gene. Now, he's won a couple, but generally, he's struggled with it everywhere he's been. And he is someone who's going to have to take that step. Now, the good thing is he's got a really good 1-2 punch with Diggs and Thielen as wide receivers. He's got a veteran tight end with Rudolph, and he's got a really good running back with Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook, who, of course, has suffered major injuries in the past, but looks very healthy now, and he'll be running behind a zone blocking scheme of Gary Kubiak, which is the scheme that the Broncos ran behind for years and years and years with Mike Shanahan, that produced 1,000-yard rushers every year, even if the running backs weren't very good. So if this offensive line can be good enough, if the scheme can cover up their issues, and Dalvin Cook can stay healthy, they could be a really good running game. And if you have a good running game, you could have a solid or good passing game. So I like their offense. I think they have a lot of potential. There's a lot of worry too. Can Cousins become the guy who wins big games? Can Diggs and Thielen remain as top wide receivers? Can Dalvin Cook stay healthy? And the biggest is, can the offensive line block? Now, the nice thing with this team is there's very little drama coming out. I've seen very few issues coming out of Minnesota. Now, there actually haven't been that many issues coming out at all this spring or this summer and this preseason, I should say. They've got issues at kicker, which has been welcome to Minnesota. But other than that, they've got continuity in their coaching staff. They've got guys who've been there. Mike Zimmer, I think, is a very respected coach. I think he's a guy that players look up to. I've never heard a bad word about him. Now, I don't listen to everything, so maybe I missed it, but I think he's a guy who can win. He's in his 6th season now as head coach. He's notched 48 wins and 5 playoff appearances with Minnesota. That's good. I mean, it's not great because he hasn't really won anything deep into the playoffs, but you still have to look at him as I believe, one of the top coaches in the NFC, at least just looking at his record. Now, can he add on to that and produce in the playoffs. I don't know. You know who else hasn't proven he can? Andy Reid. And he's absolutely one of the most talented and best coaches in football. So Mike Zimmer might be similar to that. He hasn't been able to really win the big games yet, but maybe this is his year. I actually have Minnesota going deep in the playoffs. And I have them winning at least 9 or 10 games. But this is tough because, again, this is one of those bets. The over-under is at 9.5. And that's a tough line because I think they could go 9-7 and still have a wild card. This is not an extremely deep NFC, in my opinion. There aren't that many teams. I think that the NFC South has a couple teams in Atlanta and New Orleans who are going to be at least good. But if you listen to my last show, I have New Orleans missing the playoffs. I actually have them in a major regression, which means I have Minnesota and Seattle as the wild cards. So I think they actually could win 9 games and make the playoffs. They could win 10 games and make the playoffs. But at 9.5, that's the line. This is a line that I'm not really comfortable about. So you look at their schedule, and it starts off at home against Atlanta and at Green Bay. Ouch, that's tough. I think 2 really good teams, and the only reason I have them beating Atlanta is because it's at home. I really like the Atlanta offense, and their defense is solidified. But I like Minnesota a lot, and then they play against Oakland. They have a game against the Giants later on. They're better than Detroit. They play Washington. They play at home against Denver. Seattle, I think, is decent. They're going to be another team fighting for a playoff spot. And then they finish the year at home against Detroit, at Chargers, at home against Green Bay, and at home against Chicago. They've got 2 home games to finish the year, at home against Green Bay, at home against Chicago. This is the time. This is talk about time to prove it time for the Minnesota Vikings. And I think they're going to pull it off. I think they're going to be the team that steps up. They're going to be the team that says, we want this, and they're going to win 9 or 10 games. They're going to pull off a couple wins at the end of the season to pull off that wild card spot. Now, again, that's betting on a 9.5 line, 9.5 wins. It's tough. I don't love it. Now, again, I like this team. I like Mike Zimmer. Gary Kubiak coming in as an assistant head coach and an offensive coordinator, or not coordinator. He's an offensive consultant, I believe. He's going to bring a better offense, I think, than they've had. I think the real big question mark is, can the offensive line block? If they can, this team can win 10 or 11. If they can't, I still think they can win 8 or 9 because they've got a lot of talent. And that offense, again, you got Cousins, Diggs, Thielen, Rudolph, Dalvin Cook. Those are some good players. Well coached. Not a lot of drama in that locker room, at least that we've seen or heard. This year they've been pretty quiet. Hopefully they get a new kicker who can actually kick it through the uprights. I have them at 9 or 10 wins, so I'm pushing the over-under. I'm pushing the over-under, and I hate saying it 2 teams in a row. I have to push because that's just too hard of a bet. It's too unsure if they win 9 or 10. And 9.5 is a really good line. Now, I do like them. They are Super Bowl odds 25-1. I think they're down maybe 8th or 9th in terms of the favorites to go to the Super Bowl. I actually like them in that. I really think this is an underrated team and a team that they could go all the way. Again, they're well coached. They've got a good quarterback, we hope, we think. And they've got guys around them. If they win those last few games, go into the playoffs hot, stay healthy, of course, that third-ranked defense could push them with Dalvin Cook at running back to not only a playoff berth, but a long run, a deep run into the playoffs. So that 25-1, I actually like a lot more their Super Bowl chances at 25-1 than I do the 9.5 wins. So don't bet the 9.5. But if you like a kind of a long shot, put $1 or $2 on the Minnesota Vikings because they could surprise some people, and they're going to be battle hardened after fighting through this brutal, brutal division. If they stay healthy, the defense and offense with the running game could see them through till the end. Okay, up next, the Chicago Bears. They absolutely turned things around last season, went 12-4 in 2018 with a new head coach. And that was after going 5-11 in 2017. So turned things around on its head. They were a surprise team in the NFL. They're not anymore. They've lost their defensive coach. And Tipico has them at also 9.5 wins. What do I think of the Bears? Find out next. The Bears will face off against the Packers coming up tomorrow night. Yes, I'm recording this on Wednesday. Whenever you get to listen to it, this will be valuable information, I hope, the entire season. So don't let that fool you. Don't let that scare you. Send this to your friends. Share it. Save it. Listen again. And comment. Let me know your thoughts on the NFC North. I've got other videos, of course, on YouTube covering every division. And then during the regular season, we're going to bet every single game against the spread. We're going to bet all of them. That's with me, some of my friends, the Skipper Dude, and also some of the guys and gals over at milehighreport.com. I'm really happy about that. You can find the spread that we're all betting on at milehighreport.com. That'll be published on Thursdays. And of course, I will continue having a podcast right here on YouTube covering all of my thoughts about the games each week. We will also cover the fantasy and daily fantasy, and I will pick my daily fantasy teams, my weekly fantasy, really, and I will tell you exactly why. I'll tell you why, if it's because of their travel or their drama or injuries or stats or whatever it takes. I'll tell you why I'm picking them that week. Right now, the Bears are predicted to go by Tipico to win 9.5 games. Again, if you bet the under, that means 9 or less. The over means 10 or more. It's another one that's pretty tough. They are a highly touted team, obviously, going into this season. A lot of people are picking them to win their division, picking them to be a really good defense. In fact, Bleacher Report has them ranked as the number 1 defense in all of football. The number 1. Yes, they were also the number 1 defense last year. They were first in points allowed in 2018. They had 27 interceptions, which was first in the NFL. They have some really good players. They got Roquan Smith, some really big guys on that defensive line, but they lost Callahan, they lost Amos in the secondary, and most importantly, they lost Vic Fangio. Fangio, who is a defensive genius, a guy who's been around the NFL forever, and a guy, in my opinion, like Wade Phillips, who changes the entire organization, and especially the entire defense and the schemes. They've done it everywhere they've gone, and I think Fangio is a guy who's going to do it in Denver this year, and you're going to miss him in Chicago this year as well. Chuck Pagano will come in and take over. He's a good coach. He saw a little bit of success in Indianapolis and some success as a defensive coordinator as well, but he's a guy who's got big, big shoes to fill. They've also got a guy named Nick Trubisky, who obviously he's a guy who no one really knows what to think about Trubisky. I just called him Nick. It's Mitch Trubisky. I apologize for that. Nick Trubisky. Mitch Trubisky. He's really a hard guy to predict. He doesn't have very good mechanics. He makes a lot of wonky, bad throws. I saw some of his throws trying to throw to the outside, and they're ugly. Trying to throw to his left. Google or go on Twitter and look up Trubisky throws left. It's pretty rough. Now, maybe someone selected just bad throws, but even that being the case, they're bad. I mean, really bad. Like, he's really missing something in his footwork and in his mechanics. And Nagy, the head coach, seems to think that they fixed that this year. They seem to think that he's going to be great. He's going to just figure it all out. But yeah, how often does that happen with quarterbacks? Not very often. Now, maybe it's the case. And in fact, Trubisky, he actually had the 3rd highest QBR in 2018, which I can't believe it. He had a 71.0 QBR behind only Mahomes and Breeze. I don't understand then how QBR works, because he was 29th in pass yards per game. He had 24 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, and by the eye test was one of the bottom 10 quarterbacks in football. But according to ESPN's QBR, he was 3rd highest, which maybe that should change my mind a bit about the Bears, about this offense, about Trubisky, but it just doesn't. You look again at what you can see. Look at how he plays. Look at who he is as a quarterback, and I just don't love it. I don't think there's a ton of talent there. I think he's not a guy you're just going to fix overnight or over an offseason. Now, Nagy has a lot of experience as an offensive coach. He turned this team around, which is total props to him. But a lot of that was to do with their defense, which is number 1 in the NFL last season. And that was in large part to do, in my opinion, with Vic Fangio. So you can't just tell me that Pagano is going to come in here and just, with no issues, replace what Fangio did. You also lose guys in the secondary. That's hard to replace. Now, if Trubisky can somehow become a top 10 quarterback or even a top half quarterback, then okay, this could be a good team. But I look at their offense and the talent on offense, and I just don't love it. I mean, Allen Robinson, okay, what has he done lately? Anthony Miller, Trey Burton at tight end, okay, yeah, there's potential. David Montgomery is a rookie running back that a lot of people like, but he's a rookie. No one really knows. So there's so many questions with this offense, so many questions with Trubisky. Can Nagy fix the offense? Can he? You remember last season in the playoff game, in their last playoff game that they lost, there were scenes where Nagy was like shaking his head because he knew that Trubisky couldn't really run the offense that he had because Trubisky couldn't make the proper throws. And you could almost see despair on Nagy's face. And now he seems to be more optimistic, but probably because that's what he has. He has Trubisky. And I'm just not a Trubisky believer. I don't see it with him. They have the 9th best offensive line as rated by Pro Football Focus, which, okay, that is a big help. Of course, any young quarterback, any young offense with a good offensive line, that is a huge, huge deal. Add that to a first-ranked defense, and you're looking at a good team. They have continuity with their offensive coaches. Matt Nagy, again, is in his second year. He had a surprisingly good first year, which almost never happens. Again, they were 5-11 when he took over, and they went 12-4 last season. Mark Helfrich will be the offensive coordinator, or he'll at least support Nagy on offense. This is his second season. He's been with the team for a really long time. And again, as I said before, Pagano will replace Fangio. Again, they're at 9.5 wins per Tipico. And when I start looking through their schedule, which is the 5th hardest in the NFL according to CBSSports.com, it's tough. I mean, they start at Green Bay, at home against Green Bay, which I think Green Bay is a better team. They've got a better quarterback. Then they're at Denver. Denver, they've got Fangio, who should understand this team. I think you can also say that Nagy, I can never, seriously, I say his name differently every time. The Bears head coach, he knows Fangio as well, but I see this as being a game that Denver can win. I think Denver can pick that game up at home. Denver's really good in September in Mile High. Teams come in there and they just can't run because they're not conditioned enough, so they're just out of breath all the time. The Broncos, of course, conditioning at Mile High in that thin air, they are used to it. Teams coming in are not. So games early in the season in Denver are a nightmare for whoever it is, the Bears being the case this time. So that's a tough game. Then you have Washington, Minnesota, Oakland. Okay, so you got a couple wins in there. Washington and Oakland are terrible, but Minnesota I think is quite good. So I believe you go 2-3 before the bye. Again, an early bye I don't love. Then you got New Orleans, the Chargers, Philadelphia, Murderers Row. Ouch. 2 of them at home, still really tough. Detroit, the LA Rams, Detroit again, Dallas, Green Bay, Kansas City, Minnesota. So again, they're playing the AFC West, which is a really, really tough division, in my opinion. Now, Oakland, I don't think is very good, but they're still going to throw some things out there. Their offense could be at least dangerous this year. And I think Gruden is going to just, throw some random crap out there that's going to, every now and then work. Detroit's not an easy win. As we just talked about, they're going to be a team that's going to be hard to beat. And even if you beat them, they're going to bully you up, I think. I think they're going to hurt you a bit. They're a team that you're just going to hate playing. Dallas is kind of a question mark. At Minnesota to end the season, and at home against Kansas City, 2 really tough games. And before that, they have at Green Bay. So you finish the season at home against Dallas, at Green Bay, at home against Kansas City, at Minnesota. Oh, man, it's tough. They have a couple of runs where they just have really, really hard schedules, really kind of in the middle and then at the end. And for me, it just doesn't add up. They don't have the quarterback. I just don't believe in Trubisky. And so when you don't believe in the quarterback, that's a big no-no. Now, can Nagy, he, again, pull it together? I don't see it. Now, there's not a whole lot of off-the-field stuff going on here. They're a pretty quiet organization. The players seem to be fairly happy. The coaches are fairly happy. But I can tell you this defense is going to really, really miss Vic Fangio. They're going to miss him. I don't see this as a number one defense. They've lost players and they lost their coach. And the offense doesn't blow me away. The quarterback doesn't blow me away. So I don't see them winning 9 games, or 10 games, I should say. Because again, the line is at 9.5. So I have the under. I am selling the Chicago Bears. And that's a fairly unpopular pick. But someone in this division has to lose. Someone has to lose. You have a really brutal division. You got Green Bay, you've got Detroit, and you got Minnesota. I've got Minnesota coming out on top, winning 9 or 10 games. I got Detroit winning 6 or 7. They're both a push. So they're both going to about hit their projection. We'll talk about Green Bay in a minute. But the Chicago Bears, I see as not hitting the mark. They're going to win less than 10 games, 9 or fewer. Sure, it could be 9, but I actually see them as more an 8-8, 9-7 type of a team. So I don't love this bet, but I like it. I like this bet. This is one that I would bet myself, and I think that it would be a solid one that should come to fruition. The Chicago Bears bet the under on the 9.5. They're also 15 to 1 to go to the Super Bowl. No, not even close. So just stay away from that as well. Again, in my opinion. Up next, the Green Bay Packers. They were 6-9-1 in 2018 with a Hall of Fame quarterback. Will that continue, or will Matt LaFleur be able to come in and change the offense completely and somehow bring Green Bay and Aaron Rodgers, their whiny but very, very talented quarterback, back to being a Super Bowl contending team? Super Bowl Packers up next. Green Bay Packers after this quick break. Finally, we have the Green Bay Packers and Aaron Rodgers, the guy who just is better than everyone else and does everything better and is smarter and wiser and better looking. And at least this is all according to him. This is all in his mind. He's a guy that if anyone's listened to any of my shows, knows I'm not a big Aaron Rodgers fan. That said, he is a very, very extremely talented quarterback and could go down as one of the most talented, just physically gifted quarterbacks of all time. I think without question, right now he's probably number one. Perhaps someone like Mahomes will surpass him, but he's a Hall of Fame guy. He's won the Super Bowl, and he deserves some respect, and I understand that, but he's a guy who just ran his coach out of town. He complains. His own family doesn't like him, and he's been fairly underwhelming lately. The Packers, his team, went 6-9-1, partly because he gave up. And I know people are going to complain about that and say it's not true, but the guy had the most throwaways in the NFL last year, and I think it wasn't even close. And he pretty much admittedly, just if he didn't like the play, he'd roll his eyes, he'd snap it, and then throw it away, just in spite of Mike McCarthy, his head coach. So that's a problem, and that's something that, you don't like, obviously. But he's a really talented guy. Again, last year, 16th in QBR, not great. 10th in pass yards per game, 277. 25 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. The guy just never throws picks. He just doesn't make mistakes, partly because he just throws the ball away. But that's, in the end, a good thing. Now, he's also had a couple of injuries. I think he broke his collarbone twice, which is a bit of a worry. But they have the 8th-ranked offensive line in football, according to Pro Football Focus, which is obviously good. They went out in the draft and really hit all of their needs. They got a couple guys on offense and defense, mostly on defense. They've got some talent, obviously, on offense. Davante Adams is one of the top 5 wide receivers in the league. I don't see that changing. Now, the offense is going to change a bit, but I think that it's very possible that Rodgers is just going to do whatever he wants anyway. I mean, the head coach comes over from Tennessee and from many other places. He's an offensive guy. Matt LaFleur is the head coach. He's 40 years old. Aaron Rodgers is 35, and Rodgers already thinks he knows everything more than everyone else. And so I can only imagine a guy who's about his age. That we'll see. So it may be head coach Aaron Rodgers by the end of the season. Either way, he's a very good quarterback. Davante Adams is going to eat. Valdez Scalding is the number 2. Wide receiver, I think he's going to be really solid. Jimmy Graham has really been a below-average tight end for a long time. I don't think they really upgraded that position at all. So that's a bit of a weakness. Aaron Jones is actually a really underrated running back, in my opinion. He's a guy I had on fantasy last season, and he really, really helped. In 12 games he played, he averaged 5.5 yards per carry. That's really good. You continue that for a season, or for 12 games even, you're an above-average running back without question. So you put him behind a good offensive line and with Aaron Rodgers, a new scheme that I think is going to have more play action, is going to see, more of Aaron Rodgers under center. I think it's actually going to be a good thing. I think they could struggle to start the year because of a new scheme, completely new scheme that Aaron Rodgers hasn't even touched in a game, maybe in practice, but he hasn't done squat diddly in a game in preseason or obviously in the regular season. And that I think that could take them a few games to get over. But still, Aaron Rodgers is very smart, even if maybe not quite as smart as he thinks he is, but he's very smart, and I think he'll figure that out soon enough. LaFleur is a guy, didn't have much success in Tennessee, but he coached some really good teams. He was the offensive coordinator, I believe, in L.A., and Atlanta, and both times where they had very solid offenses. So he's a guy who has definitely seen some success. His coordinators are also, his offensive coordinator, Nathaniel Hackett, this is his first ever job as a coordinator, so that's iffy. I think LaFleur is going to call the plays, so those guys will work together. We'll see. LaFleur's got plenty of experience as a coordinator, so that's a plus. Mike Pettin is in his second season as defensive coordinator, so they hold him over from the last coaching staff. He has also seen some success. He coached the Cleveland Browns, didn't get a whole lot of a chance there because, well, they're the Cleveland Browns. But he has been a good defensive coach. He coached the Baltimore Ravens defense for a few years a while back and has a very good pedigree. According to CBS Sports, they have the 14th hardest schedule, so right dead in the middle, so not a whole lot you can take from that. Their defense is also, as we said before, one of the top 12 defenses in football per Bleacher Report. They're ranked 11th by BleacherReport.com. They're 22nd in points allowed in 2018, so below average. Bleacher Report really believes that they have really, really upgraded their defense. They had a couple guys that they drafted. They think they're going to take this big leap. I'm not real sure about that. I'm not sure they can go 22nd to 11, in one season, maybe, again, if these rookies can really step it up and pick that up. But that seemed like a bit of a jump to me. And again, so if you go and look at their schedule, of course, they play Thursday night at Chicago. Tough game, but I like Green Bay better. As everyone knows by now, I'm not super high in Chicago. I'm not high in Trubisky, and I think their defense is not going to be as good as they were last year. So I like that game. And then they're at home against Minnesota, and at home against Denver, at home against Philadelphia. So a pretty tough row of games, but they're at home. They've got a really good crowd. I think they can at least in those 4 games come out at 500, and I think they could be 3-1. Then you got Dallas at home against Detroit, at home against Oakland. Those should be wins. And then a really tough 2 games at Kansas City, at LA Chargers, 2 teams I really like. But then they have at home against Carolina and a bye. So you go into the bye and you're looking at probably around 500. After the bye in week 11, which is a good time to have a bye, that I like a lot. They come out at San Francisco and at the Giants, 2 teams that are not as good as the Green Bay Packers. Should be wins. Then they're at home against Washington, at home against Chicago. Again, should be wins. And they're at Minnesota, at Detroit. So another really tough ending. Minnesota is going to be a tough win. I think Minnesota is going to be really fighting for that playoff spot. I think they could take it, but then I think that Green Bay will take it Detroit in a game that they're absolutely going to need. So when it comes to it, again, the Green Bay Packers are at 9.5 wins by Tipico. Again, a really hard bet. As you know, in this show, I've pushed on Detroit at 6.5, and I've pushed on the Minnesota Vikings at 9.5 because I just don't like them enough. I think those are good lines. Those are good predictions. Green Bay Packers at 9.5 is also a good line, but I'm going to buy the Packers. I think they can win 10 games. I think this is a schedule that they can come away with 10 games. Now, I'm just saying this because I don't want to have 3 pushes. Honestly, I wouldn't bet this. If you're a Green Bay Packers fan, okay, go bet it. And I think you'll feel okay about it. And I bet this because they've got Aaron Rodgers. I don't like him as a guy. I think he's a stuck-up jerk sometimes, but he's really talented. And I think now that the coach is gone that he didn't like, I think he's going to want to show, hey, look, now watch what I can do. Look at me now, McCarthy. Hey, jerk, look at me now. I think he's going to be like this little kid who wants to show everyone and show the world that McCarthy was holding him back. And I think that's the personality that Aaron Rodgers has. And that being the case, I think they can win 10 games. I don't love it, but I can see it happening. 20-1 odds to win the Super Bowl. Yeah, it's good. It's not great. It's something that I think, again, if you're a Packers fan, it's a solid bet. Why not? But there are better bets. I think the Minnesota Vikings at 25-1 is a better bet. Absolutely. I think Minnesota, in a lot of ways, is a better team than the Green Bay Packers. They've got a bit of a harder schedule. So I think, and again, I just like Rodgers better than Cousins. So it comes down to the quarterback. This is a quarterback-driven league, and I think that's going to put the Packers on top in the division. I think the Packers win it. I think they win 10 games. They win the division, and then Minnesota is a wild card in the NFC North. So buy it at 9.5, but don't love it. That's what I've got for today's show in terms of betting. We'll do a really quick fantasy segment. I'm just going to stay on right now because who needs a break? It's my own podcast. I can do whatever the heck I want. There are some guys, obviously, to pay attention to in the league. I think a guy who's really underrated is Kerryon Johnson. He's a guy that you're going to want to really watch, especially early in the season. I think that, and we're talking about daily fantasy right now, I think that they're going to really pound the rock early on, probably the whole season. And early on, the running game is going to determine games for teams. And I think at Arizona, at LA, at Philadelphia, I don't see them winning 3 of those games. I don't see them winning 2 of those games. But for Detroit, I think they're going to really pound the rock. And I think Kerryon Johnson is going to score a couple touchdowns, and he's a good bet to have in there. Same goes with Aaron Jones. I mean, he's going to be a bit of a higher pick probably than Kerryon Johnson. He's going to cost a little bit more. But, that's okay. I think he's worth it. In terms of quarterbacks, don't buy Stafford. He's just never a very good quarterback. Cousins, we'll see. I would wait a few weeks before you start playing him. Rodgers, I think you can play right away. He's a veteran guy. Even though it's a new system, he's going to probably be cheaper than he will be later on because people aren't sure about him in the new system with Matt LaFleur, but I think he'll be able to figure it out. He's got some good targets, especially in the guy that you should definitely pay attention to, Davante Adams, someone that I think is an absolute buy. Now, we're going to focus a lot more on fantasy football coming up this week. I'm going to do a show about strictly this week's bets and fantasy football. So pay attention. That's coming out tomorrow in time for the first NFL game of the season, Green Bay Packers against the Chicago Bears. Can't wait for it. Hope that you all will tune in for the bets and then tune in again for how the bets went. Definitely go check out milehighreport.com. The spreadsheet will be published. If anyone's interested in betting with us and betting on the spread, in picking these games against the spread, follow me on Twitter. Find me on Twitter. That's at Kevy Gillikin, KEVVYGILLIKIN. And send me a message and we'll get you on there for the pick'em against the spread. Definitely not as easy as just a straight up pick'em. This is much harder and definitely requires much, much more skill. Find me there at Kevy Gillikin. Find me on milehighreport.com and listen to my other podcast, Broncos and Bratwurst. And please, again, come back here. Hope to see you soon. Until then.